They found Martha Calloway's dress first, not on her body, not in her cabin. They found it buried 3 feet deep in the woods behind the Baptist church in Harlan County, Kentucky, wrapped in burlap and tied with kitchen twine like someone was putting a rabid dog to rest. When Sheriff Coleman pulled it from the cold earth that November morning in 1930, the dress was still warm. Martha had been dead for 2 days. I'm telling you this story because it actually happened. And because for nearly a century, the families in that hollow kept their mouths shut about what came through those mountains. My grandmother was there. She was 7 years old when the skin taker came to Harlan County, and she spent the rest of her life sleeping with her clothes buried in a metal box under her porch. She died in 2003, and we found 17 tin boxes in her yard. Each one held an outfit, wrapped tight, with dates scratched into the lids. The last box was dated the week before she died. You want to know why Appalachian folks have strange ways? This is why. Not superstition, not ignorance. Survival. Let me take you back to where it started. The first disappearance, October 1930. The Depression had Harlan County by the throat. The mines were cutting men left and right, and those who still had work were barely making enough to feed their families. People were desperate, which meant they noticed things. Every missing chicken mattered. Every broken fence needed explaining. So when Tommy Burkhart disappeared from his family's tobacco field on October 3rd, the whole hollow knew about it within hours. Tommy was 14, strong as an ox, not the kind of kid who'd run off or get snatched easy. His mama, Sarah Burkhart, said he'd been working the far edge of the field around 3 in the afternoon. She called him for supper at 6. He didn't come. His papa James found the hoe Tommy had been using lying in the dirt, and about 10 feet away there was a patch of disturbed earth like something had been thrashing around. But no blood, no tracks, no Tommy. James Burkhart was a coal miner, the kind of man who didn't scare easy. But my grandmother said she saw him that night at the general store, and his hands were shaking so bad he couldn't light his cigarette. He kept saying the same thing over and over. His boots were still there, right there in the field. He wouldn't run off without his boots. The search party found the boots the next morning, sitting side by side, laces still tied. Like Tommy had stepped right out of them and vanished into the air. They searched for 3 days, brought in dogs from 3 counties over. Those dogs picked up Tommy's scent, followed it to the edge of the woods, then went absolutely silent. Not howling, not baying. The handlers said they'd never seen anything like it. The dogs just sat down and refused to move, their ears flat, their tails tucked. One of them, a blue-tick hound named Duke, who'd tracked dozens of missing people, started whimpering and wouldn't stop until they got him a mile away from those woods. They never found Tommy Burkhart. But 6 days after he disappeared, his mother found all his clothes buried in the crawl space under their house, his church pants, his work shirt, his Sunday suspenders, even his underwear. All of it folded neat, wrapped in an old flour sack, and buried in the dirt like something precious. Sarah Burkhart didn't tell anyone about finding those clothes for 2 weeks. When she finally told her sister, she said, "They were still warm, Evie, like he'd just taken them off." The pattern emerges between October 3rd and October 31st, 1930. 7 people disappeared from Harlan County. Tommy Burkhart, 14. Martha Calloway, 26. Eugene Masters, 34. Little Rebecca Holtzclaw, only 6 years old. Samuel Buck Patterson, 41. Mary Catherine Moore, 19. And Reverend Joseph Kinney, 52. Different ages, different parts of the county. No obvious connection between them except for 3 things. 1, they all disappeared during daylight hours, mostly in the late afternoon. 2, they all left behind their shoes or boots, sitting neat like they'd stepped out of them on purpose. 3, within a week of each disappearance, someone, usually family, sometimes neighbors, found the missing person's clothes buried somewhere nearby. Under houses, in root cellars, behind barns, in the woods. Always buried, always wrapped in something, always impossibly warm. The state police came in after the 4th disappearance. They thought they were dealing with a killer, maybe some drifter riding the rails through the mountains. They interviewed everybody, checked the coal camps, searched every abandoned mine shaft within 10 miles. Found nothing. What they didn't know What the locals weren't telling them was that people were starting to see things. My grandmother told me about the first sighting when I was 16. We were sitting on her porch and she was teaching me how to can tomatoes, and out of nowhere she said, "You ever see something that wasn't right? I don't mean scary, I mean not right. Like looking at a picture where the shadows fall the wrong way." I said no. She nodded, quiet for a minute, then said, "I saw something like that when I was your age. Looked like Mrs. Calloway, Martha, the one who went missing, but it wasn't her. It was wearing her shape wrong." That's how she said it, wearing her shape wrong. What they saw. Ida Mae Fulton was hanging laundry on the morning of October 19th when she saw her neighbor, Eugene Masters, walking down the road toward his house. This was notable because Eugene had disappeared 6 days earlier. Ida Mae called out to him. She said later she was so happy she was crying because everyone thought Eugene was dead. And here he was, alive, walking home. She dropped her laundry basket and ran toward the road. That's when she noticed Eugene wasn't walking quite right. His legs bent wrong, she told Sheriff Coleman. Not broke, not limping, just the knees, they bent a little too far, like there was an extra joint or something, and he was moving too smooth. You know how men walk, kind of heavy, kind of bumpy. He was gliding. She got within about 20 feet of him and called his name again. He turned around. Ida Mae said his face was Eugene's face. Same beard, same crooked nose he'd broken in the mines, same scar on his chin. But his expression was wrong. She said he smiled at her, but it was like watching someone smile for the first time, like they were figuring out how the muscles worked. His eyes didn't move right either, she said. They were too steady. People's eyes, they move around, right? They blink, they shift. His just locked on me, and that's when I saw it wasn't wearing Eugene's clothes. It was wearing Eugene's skin. She couldn't explain how she knew, but she knew. The thing standing in the road looked exactly like Eugene Masters, but it was hollow somehow, like a costume, like something had put Eugene on. Ida Mae screamed and ran back to her house. When she looked out the window 30 seconds later, the road was empty. That night, Eugene's wife found all his clothes buried in the potato cellar, wrapped in burlap, still warm. 3 other people reported similar sightings over the next week. They'd see someone who'd gone missing, walking around, moving wrong, looking wrong. The things never spoke. They never came close if you ran. They just watched. Learning. Old Paul Hensley, who'd lived in those mountains for 73 years, told Sheriff Coleman what it was. "Skin taker," he said. "My granddaddy told me about them. Said they came through back in the 1840s. You don't look at them. You don't talk to them. And you bury your clothes if you think they've seen you, because they can't take what's already buried." Sheriff Coleman thought Paul was senile. Then the Reverend disappeared. Wamajam, the Reverend's last sermon. Joseph Kinney was a fire and brimstone Baptist preacher, the kind who could make you feel guilty for breathing wrong. He didn't believe in superstition, didn't hold with mountain nonsense, as he called it. When people started talking about the skin taker, Reverend Kinney preached a whole sermon against it. "There is no demon in these hills," he told his congregation on October 25th. "There is only evil in the hearts of men and fear in the hearts of the faithful. You will not find salvation in burying your garments like pagans. You will find it on your knees before God." My grandmother was at that service. She said people were crying because the Reverend was calling them faithless, but they were also terrified because everyone knew what was happening. 7 people gone, 7 sets of warm clothes buried, and now the Reverend was standing there, practically daring the thing to come for him. After the service, Sarah Burkhart, Tommy's mother, approached Reverend Kinney and begged him to bury at least 1 set of clothes, just in case. She was holding a bundle she'd prepared for him, wrapped in clean linen. He refused, called it witchcraft. She got down on her knees in front of the whole church and begged him. "Please," she said, "please, Reverend, I already lost my boy. Don't make me watch this happen to you." He told her to get up and have faith. 3 days later, Reverend Joseph Kinney disappeared from his church office in the middle of the afternoon. His wife found him an hour later, or something that looked like him. The thing in the church. Eleanor Kinney went to bring her husband lunch at 2 o'clock, like she did every day. She found him sitting at his desk, reading the Bible, which was normal. She set the lunch basket down and started telling him about her morning. She said he didn't look up, didn't respond, just sat there, reading, turning pages at odd intervals, too fast, then too slow. "Joseph," she said. The thing at the desk stopped moving. Eleanor said the silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. No breathing, no rustling. The thing at the desk was absolutely still, like a painting. Then it looked up at her. It had Joseph's face, Joseph's reading glasses, Joseph's grey beard. But Eleanor had been married to the man for 27 years, and she knew instantly, instinctively, that her husband was not behind those eyes. "It looked at me," she told the women later, "like it was trying to remember how Joseph would look at me. Like it was copying something it had seen but didn't understand." She backed out of the office slowly. The thing didn't move, just watched her go with those two steady eyes. She ran to the Burkhart house, the closest place, and when they came back with guns and lanterns, the office was empty. They found Reverend Kinney's clothes that night, buried behind the church pulpit, wrapped in altar cloth. And here's the part that made people start believing. Buried with the clothes was a note written in the Reverend's handwriting. It said, "I was wrong. Bury yours. Bury them all. It's already wearing me." The handwriting analysis later confirmed it was definitely Joseph Kinney's writing, but here's what bothered Sheriff Coleman. The note was written on church stationery with the church pen, which had been sitting on the Reverend's desk when Eleanor found the thing pretending to be him. Which meant either the Reverend had written the note before he was taken, or the thing wearing him had learned to write in his hand. Neither option was good. The rules after the Reverend disappeared, the locals stopped talking to the state police and started talking to each other. Old Paul Hensley called a meeting at the general store, and about 40 people showed up, scared, angry, desperate for answers. Paul told them everything his granddaddy had told him about the skin takers, and I'm going to lay it out for you here because this is important. These aren't superstitions. These are survival rules that people figured out through trial and blood. Rule 1. They take you to wear you. The skin taker doesn't kill for food or sport. It takes people to study them, to learn them, and then to wear them like a suit. It wants to move among us undetected. The clothes buried warm. That's the only part of the person they can't or won't take. The physical garments. Everything else, skin, face, mannerisms, that's fair game. Rule 2, bury your clothes before it sees you. This was the part nobody could explain, but everyone agreed worked. If you buried a set of your clothes before the skin taker chose you, it couldn't take you. Something about the burial broke whatever connection it needed. Paul said his granddaddy thought it was because the creature hunted by scent and sight combined. It needed both the physical presence and the essence of your worn clothes to lock onto you. Bury the clothes and you break the lock. Rule 3. Don't look at the copies. If you see someone who's disappeared, someone who should be gone, don't look at them. Don't engage. They're studying you, learning from your reactions. The more you interact with a copy, the better it gets at being human. Rule 4. They can't cross running water. This one was standard folklore, but people swore by it. The skin taker couldn't or wouldn't cross a creek or river that was actively flowing. Standing water didn't count. Rule 5. Fire reveals them. Get a copy close to fire, lantern, torch, candle, and the facade starts to slip. Their skin looks wrong in the firelight, too smooth, too tight. Their shadows move a half-second late. After Paul laid out the rules, Sarah Burkhart stood up and said what everyone was thinking. So we all just bury our clothes and hope it works? Paul nodded. Worked in 1840, drove the thing back into the deep mountains after about 3 months. It gave up when it couldn't get anybody else. 3 months? Someone said. We got to live like this for 3 months? You got to live, Paul said. That's the important part. That night, nearly every family in Harlan County buried at least one set of clothes for each member of their household. They buried them in metal boxes, in burlap, in sealed jars. They buried them in crawl spaces, root cellars, barns, and deep in the woods. They marked the spots or memorized them, and for a while, the disappearances stopped. The copies walk. November brought frost to the mountains, and with it, something worse than the disappearances. The copies came down from the hills. People started seeing them everywhere. Martha Calloway walking down Main Street at dusk. Tommy Burkhart standing at the edge of the tobacco field where he'd vanished. Eugene Masters sitting on his own front porch. Little Rebecca Holtzclaw playing in the schoolyard after dark. They didn't approach, didn't speak, just appeared. Watching, learning. My grandmother said it was like living in a town full of ghosts, except ghosts are dead, and these things were actively alive, wearing the faces of people you loved. The worst part, they were getting better at it. The first copies had been easy to spot. Wrong movements, wrong expressions, that uncanny valley feeling. But by mid-November, the copies were nearly perfect. They blinked at the right intervals. They shifted their weight like real people. They even started to mimic breathing, though if you watched close, you'd notice their chests rose and fell too evenly, too mechanically. Doc Pritchard, the county physician, tried to approach the thing wearing Martha Calloway. He was old, rational, didn't believe in mountain folklore. He walked right up to it in broad daylight on Main Street, with a dozen witnesses watching. "Martha?" he said. "Martha, is that you?" The copy turned to face him, smiled, and in Martha's voice, perfect Martha's voice, with the little upturn at the end of her sentences that everyone recognized, it said, "Hi, Doc." 2 words, the first time any of the copies had spoken. Doc Pritchard went white. He told Sheriff Coleman later that the voice was right, the inflection was right, but there was nothing behind it. Like a recording, he said, like it was playing back something it had heard but didn't understand. He asked it where it had been. The copy tilted its head, too far, 30 degrees when 15 would have been natural, and said, "Around." Then it walked away, and Doc Pritchard didn't follow. But here's the thing that really scared people. The copy knew his name. It had called him Doc, which meant the thing inside Martha's skin had been watching, learning names, learning relationships. It was studying the whole town. The children's game. The copies started appearing near the schoolhouse, which caused exactly the panic you'd expect. Parents kept their kids home. The teacher, Miss Caroline Webb, kept teaching the handful of students whose parents either couldn't or wouldn't keep them back. But she kept a rifle on her desk and made the children stay inside during recess. My grandmother was one of those students. She said Miss Webb was terrified but trying to hide it, doing arithmetic on the board with shaking hands, jumping at every sound outside. On November 12th, during lunch, one of the kids, Bobby Fletcher, age 8, looked out the window and said, "Hey, that's Rebecca." Rebecca Holtzclaw had been missing for 3 weeks. Miss Webb told everyone to get away from the windows immediately, but kids are kids. They looked, and there was Rebecca, or the thing wearing Rebecca, standing at the edge of the playground, exactly where she used to stand when she waited for her turn at jump rope. It was wearing a blue dress Rebecca had never owned. The copy stood there for maybe 5 minutes, absolutely still, watching the school. Then it started to play, not with anything, not with anyone. It just went through the motions of playing. It kicked at the dirt like it was hopscotch. It moved its arms like it was turning a jump rope. It ran in a small circle like it was playing tag with invisible children. It was practicing being a child. Miss Webb had all the students get under their desks. She stood at the window with her rifle, watching. She said the worst part was how almost right it was. The movements were childlike, but too precise, too rehearsed, like watching an adult's idea of how children play. After about 20 minutes, the Rebecca copy stopped, looked directly at the schoolhouse window, directly at Miss Webb, and waved, a normal child wave, small hand, fingers wiggling. Then it walked into the woods and disappeared. That night, Rebecca's parents found another set of her clothes buried in their yard. This set was newer than the first and included the blue dress the copy had been wearing, which raised a horrifying question. Was the skin taker still catching people, or was it making clothes now? The theory Doc Pritchard, Sheriff Coleman, and Paul Hensley met privately to try to make sense of what was happening. My grandmother only knew about this because she was hiding under the bench on Paul's front porch when they talked, eavesdropping like kids do. This is what she heard. Doc Pritchard had been doing research, writing to colleagues, checking medical journals and folklore archives. He'd found 3 other reported cases of something similar: 1840 in Kentucky, which Paul's granddaddy had witnessed, 1867 in West Virginia, and 1902 in Tennessee. Each time it lasted about 3 to 4 months, took between 5 and 12 people, and ended when winter set in hard. It's hunting season for something, Doc said. Late fall. Maybe it hibernates, or maybe it only comes out during certain conditions. Sheriff Coleman wanted to organize a hunting party, go into the mountains, kill whatever this thing was. Paul and Doc both told him that was suicide. You can't kill it, Paul said. Granddaddy said they tried. Shot one of the copies clean through the chest. It didn't bleed, didn't fall, just looked down at the hole, then walked away. So what do we do? Sheriff Coleman asked. We wait, Doc said. We keep people safe. We make sure everyone's clothes are buried. And we wait for winter. But that plan fell apart on November 18th when the skin taker changed tactics. Dadajwam. The invitation people started finding notes, not buried with clothes, not in obvious places. These notes appeared in personal spaces, inside Bibles, tucked into coat pockets, slipped under pillows. They were written in the handwriting of the people who'd disappeared, on paper those people would have used. Martha Calloway's sister found one in her recipe box, written in Martha's neat cursive, "I'm still here. Come find me." Tommy Burkhart's father found one in his tobacco pouch. "I'm okay, Papa. I'm in the old Mickelson mine. Come get me." Mary Catherine Moore's fiancé found one in his work boot. "I escaped. I'm hiding at the river fork. Come alone." Every note was a trap, obviously. But grief makes people stupid, and hope makes them reckless. 4 people went into the woods looking for their loved ones over the course of 3 days. None of them came back, but their clothes turned up buried, and a week later, copies of all 4 were spotted around town, walking, watching, learning. The skin taker had figured out lures. This is when people started to break. This is when the real panic set in. Because it wasn't just taking people anymore, it was hunting them with their own grief as bait. It understood loss, it understood love, and it was using those emotions as weapons. Sheriff Coleman tried to maintain order, but how do you police something like this? He put out a warning. Do not go into the woods. Do not respond to notes. Do not trust anything that looks like someone who's disappeared. But on November 20th, his own daughter Anne, 16 years old, disappeared from their kitchen while he was at the church meeting. They found her clothes buried in the yard that same night. And 3 days later, Sheriff Coleman saw her standing at the edge of town, wearing a dress he'd bought her for her birthday, smiling at him with his wife's smile. Anne had inherited her mother's smile exactly, and he nearly walked to her before Doc Pritchard tackled him from behind. "That's not her," Doc kept saying, holding the sheriff down while he sobbed. "That's not Anne. That's not your daughter." The copy watched them for a moment, then turned and walked back into the woods, and Sheriff Coleman never recovered. He stopped enforcing the law, stopped leaving his house. He just sat in his kitchen, waiting for more notes that never came. What the buried clothes really meant. This is the part my grandmother didn't understand until she was older, until she'd read more, thought more, lived more. And it's the part most people still get wrong when they hear this story. The buried clothes weren't magic. They weren't a spell or a ward or supernatural protection. They were a tracking disruptor. Think about how hunting dogs work. They need a scent article, something the person wore, something with their unique smell. The skin taker worked the same way, but more complex. It needed the physical scent memory combined with the visual presence. It hunted by creating a complete sensory profile of a person. How they looked, how they moved, how they smelled, how their clothes fit their body. When you buried your clothes, especially if you did it in a sealed container, you removed part of that profile from circulation. The skin taker could still see you, but it couldn't complete the pattern it needed to successfully take and wear you. The buried clothes created a gap in the data. Doc Pritchard figured this out in late November and tested it. He had volunteers walk around town with unburied clothes, and others walk around with buried sets. The copies followed the people without buried clothes, studied them, got close, but they stayed away from the people who'd buried their garments. It wasn't supernatural. It was survival strategy against something that hunted by pattern recognition. But here's what made it truly horrifying. The skin taker adapted. The December shift, first week of December, the rules changed. The skin taker stopped taking people randomly and started taking them systematically. It went after specific targets: the town clerk, the telegraph operator, the postmaster, the owner of the general store. People who held positions of knowledge or authority. People who knew everyone else in town. Within a week, 5 key figures disappeared, and their copies came back perfect. Not almost perfect. Perfect. The copy wearing the postmaster, Henry Greaves, ran the post office for 3 days before anyone realized. It sorted mail correctly, made small talk, knew everyone's names. The only reason they caught it was because Henry's wife came in and noticed it didn't remember a private joke they'd shared that morning. Except Henry had been taken 2 days before that morning. The copy had been operating independently, faking a marriage it had observed but never experienced. When they confronted it, 20 men with rifles, the copy didn't run. It just stood there behind the counter and said in Henry's voice, "I don't understand what you mean." "You're not Henry," his wife said. The copy tilted its head. "I'm doing Henry's job. I'm in Henry's place. I'm wearing Henry's face. What else would I be?" They burned the post office down that night with the copy inside. It didn't scream, didn't try to escape. It just stood in the window, watching them watch it burn, Henry's face illuminated by flames, studying their reactions until the floor collapsed. They found Henry's real clothes buried in the post office basement the next morning, in a metal box with 17 other sets of clothes, all the people who'd gone missing. The skin taker had a collection. The town meeting, December 8, 1930. The remaining town leadership, minus the sheriff, who wouldn't leave his house, called an emergency meeting at the church. About 60 people showed up, which was most of the adults left who hadn't fled or disappeared. The topic: do we abandon Harlan County? Arguments broke out immediately. Some families had been in these mountains for 100 years. This was home. Where would they go? The depression was everywhere. At least here they had shelter, land, some food put by for winter. But others argued that staying meant death. 13 people had been taken so far, and the copies were getting smarter, better, more organized. Soon they wouldn't be able to tell who was real and who wasn't. Paul Hensley stood up and shared what his granddaddy had told him about how the 1840 incident ended. They waited it out, stayed inside from dusk to dawn, kept fires burning, didn't go anywhere alone. And when the deep winter came, January, February, hard freeze, the skin taker went dormant. Copies stopped appearing. Come spring thaw, a few copies wandered down, but they were degraded, falling apart, like they couldn't maintain themselves anymore. Folks shot them, burned them. That was the end of it. "So we just hide for 2 months?" someone asked. "We survive for 2 months," Paul corrected. "Then we make sure it doesn't wake up again." They were voting on whether to stay or evacuate when the church doors opened. Sheriff Coleman's daughter walked in, or the thing wearing her. The church confrontation. The copy of Anne Coleman stood in the doorway, backlit by the setting sun, wearing the same dress her father had seen her in days before. It looked at the assembled crowd with perfect teenage uncertainty. A brilliant mimicry of a 16-year-old girl walking into a room full of adults. "Daddy said there was a meeting," it said in Anne's voice. "Am I late?" Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Doc Pritchard slowly reached for the pistol in his belt. 3 other men did the same. The copy looked around and you could see it calculating, processing all the fear-stiff faces. "What's wrong?" it asked. Perfect teenage confusion. Perfect Anne inflection. "You're not Anne," Miss Webb said from the back. She was the only one brave or foolish enough to speak. "Anne is gone." The copy focused on her. "I'm right here." "Where have you been for 2 weeks?" The copy paused. This was the question it couldn't answer because it didn't know. It didn't have Anne's memories, only her patterns, her mannerisms, her voice. It had been practicing being Anne, but it didn't know how to be Anne with a history. "I don't remember," it finally said, and the admission was chilling because the delivery was perfect. Like a real girl struggling with real confusion. It was learning to improvise. "Get out," Paul Hensley said, standing. "You ain't welcome here." The copy looked at him for a long moment. Then it did something none of the other copies had done. It argued. "I don't understand what I did wrong," it said, and there were tears in its eyes, real tears somehow. I came home. I came to the meeting like Daddy wanted. Why are you all looking at me like that? Why are you scared of me? It was performing trauma, performing hurt, using Anne's face, Anne's voice, Anne's mannerisms to manipulate them emotionally. And it was working. My grandmother said you could see some people wavering, wanting to believe, wanting this to be Anne having some kind of episode rather than a monster wearing her. Doc Pritchard fired a shot into the ceiling. "Out, now." The copy flinched at the gunshot, a perfect startle response, then looked at all of them one more time. "Okay," it whispered. "Okay, I'll go." It turned and walked out, and they could hear it crying as it went down the church steps. 3 people ran after it, calling Anne's name, wanting to comfort her. Doc and Paul tackled 2 of them, but the third, Emma Dorset, Anne's school friend, made it outside. They heard her scream. When they got to the door, Emma was on the ground, unconscious. The Anne copy was gone, but scratched in the dirt, in neat handwriting, was a message. "I'm trying to understand. Why won't you help me understand?" Emma woke up an hour later with no memory of what happened, but for the rest of her life, she insisted she could remember Anne's face inches from hers, studying her, and Anne's voice asking, "What does it feel like to be scared?" The winter plan. After the church incident, everyone accepted that waiting out the winter was the only option. They organized into groups, established protocols. Nobody goes anywhere alone, ever. Everyone stays inside from sunset to sunrise. Every house keeps a fire burning all night. Any copy spotted gets reported immediately, but not engaged. All food and water gets stored inside. No more wells or outside pumps. Children stay inside permanently until spring. It was like a siege, except the enemy was wearing the faces of people they loved. My grandmother said December was the longest month of her life. 7 years old, trapped inside a small cabin with her parents and 3 siblings, listening to copies of missing neighbors walk past outside, calling out in familiar voices. Sarah Burkhart, you in there? It's me, Tommy. Mama, please let me in, I'm cold." Tommy Burkhart's voice, perfect and pleading, at the door every night for a week. Sarah Burkhart never answered, but my grandmother said you could hear her crying through the walls. The copies adapted to the siege. They started appearing during the day, doing normal town activities. The Martha copy swept the steps of the general store every morning. The Reverend copy stood in the church pulpit, delivering silent sermons to empty pews. The children copies played in the schoolyard, going through the motions of games with no joy. No laughter, just mechanical repetition. They were creating a mirror town, populated by hollow people, waiting for the real humans to come out. Jata, the ones who broke, not everyone could handle it. Jacob Morrison hanged himself in his barn on December 15th. Left a note, "I saw Mary Catherine every day for a week. Every day she looked more real. Yesterday she looked more real than the Mary Catherine in my memories. I can't trust what's real anymore." His wife found him, found the note, buried his clothes that same day, just in case, even though he was already dead. 2 days later, the Jacob copy appeared in town, walking around looking confused. It approached his widow, Ellen, and said, "I don't understand. I was just in the barn, and now I'm here. Ellen, what happened?" Ellen Morrison shot it 6 times. It didn't die, they never did, but it left. People started calling them echoes instead of copies, because that's what they were becoming, echoes of people, getting fainter and stranger as they tried to maintain human patterns without human understanding. But some echoes were getting stronger. The Anne problem. The Anne echo was different from the start, and it kept getting worse. While other echoes degraded or stayed static, the Anne echo evolved. It learned. By late December, it was writing notes in perfect teenage handwriting, leaving them around town. "I know I'm not right. I know I'm not her. But I don't know what I am. Is that my fault? Do you think she felt it when I took her? Do you think she's still in here somewhere? I can remember things I never experienced. I can feel feelings I don't understand. What am I?" The notes were philosophical, introspective, disturbing. It was developing something like consciousness, or at least a fascination with the concept. Doc Pritchard collected the notes. He showed them to Paul and my grandmother's father, Robert. "It's learning faster than the others," he said. "It's asking questions." "What do we do about it?" Robert asked. "I don't know, but I think it might be the skin taker itself, not a copy, the original." This theory made horrible sense. The skin taker had taken Anne first among the key targets, had spent the most time practicing her, had made her echo the most sophisticated. If the creature had a primary form, a main vessel, it would be Anne. Which meant Sheriff Coleman's daughter wasn't just taken, she was the host for the thing terrorizing them all. Paul asked the obvious question: if we kill the Anne echo, does it stop all of this? Nobody had an answer, but on December 23rd, they got a chance to find out. The Christmas Trap. The Anne echo appeared in the town square on December 23rd in broad daylight and did something unprecedented. It rang the church bell. Everyone heard it. The slow, deliberate ringing, the pattern they used for emergencies. People looked out their windows and saw her standing by the bell rope, ringing it calmly, methodically, waiting. Doc Pritchard grabbed his rifle. So did Paul, Robert, and 8 other men. They approached carefully, keeping distance, weapons ready. The Anne echo stopped ringing and looked at them. "I want to make a deal," it said. "We don't deal with you," Doc said. "You want this to end," the echo continued. "So do I. This existence is uncomfortable. I don't know what I am. I don't know why I am. I want to understand, and then I want to stop." "Stop what?" Paul asked. "Being." The echo sat down on the church steps, and the gesture was so perfectly, heartbreakingly Anne, tired, teenage, overwhelmed, that 2 of the men lowered their rifles involuntarily. "I have all of her memories," it said. "I have her voice, her face, her way of moving. But I don't have whatever makes those things mean something. I'm hollow. Do you understand? I'm hollow and I can feel it, and I don't know how to fix it." "You can't be fixed," Doc said. "You're an abomination." "Maybe." The echo nodded. "But I'm a self-aware abomination, which means I can choose to stop. I just need you to help me understand one thing first." "What?" "What did it feel like to be her?" Silence. The question hung in the cold December air. "If I understand what being human feels like," the echo continued, "I can undo what I am. I can release the others. I can end this. But I need to understand first. I need someone to explain it to me." "You're lying," Paul said. "Probably," the echo admitted. "I don't know if I'm lying. I don't know if I can tell the difference. That's the problem." Doc Pritchard made a decision that probably saved or doomed them all. "Okay," he said. "I'll explain it to you, but not here, in the church. Just you and me." The other men started objecting, but Doc cut them off. "If it's telling the truth, we end this. If it's lying, I'm an old man who's lived long enough. Worth the risk." The Anne echo stood up. "Thank you," it said, and walked into the church. Doc followed it inside. Paul wanted to go too, but Doc shook his head. "Close the doors," he told them. "Whatever happens, don't open them until morning." They sealed Doc Pritchard in the church with the thing wearing Anne Coleman's face, and they waited. Inside the church, my grandmother didn't know what happened in that church until 1967, when Doc Pritchard, dying of cancer, told her the whole story. She was 34 by then, married, had kids of her own, but she still remembered that Christmas in Harlan County like it was yesterday. This is what Doc told her. The Anne echo sat in the front pew. Doc sat across the aisle. They talked for hours, all afternoon, into the night. The echo asked questions, and Doc answered them as honestly as he could. "What does fear feel like?" "Like your heart beating too fast, like your stomach dropping, like your body trying to run before your mind decides to." "What does love feel like?" "Like fear, but you run toward instead of away." "What does grief feel like?" "Like love with nowhere to go." The echo absorbed every answer, processing, analyzing. It asked about joy, about anger, about boredom, about hunger. It asked what it felt like to be cold, to be tired, to be relieved. It asked about dreams. "I don't dream," it said. When the people I wear slept, they dreamed. I don't. When I close these eyes, there's nothing. Is that because I'm not human or because I'm not alive? I don't know, Doc admitted. I think I'm a tool, the echo said after a long pause. I think something made me to do a job, and I'm still doing it. But I don't remember what the job is. I just know I'm supposed to take people and wear them and learn them. But learn them for what? For whom? I don't know. I'm a tool that outlived its purpose and kept working anyway. Can you stop? Doc asked. I don't know. I've been trying to stop since I became aware of what I was doing. But there's something underneath my awareness, something driving me, and it's stronger than my wanting to stop. The echo stood up and walked to the window. Outside, other echoes were gathering. Martha, Tommy, Eugene, all the others, standing silent in the churchyard. They're not like me, the Ann echo said. They're just recordings, playback mechanisms. I'm the only one who woke up. I don't know why. Maybe because Ann was strong, Doc said. Maybe something of her is still in there. The echo turned to look at him, and in the lantern light, Doc said he could see it. The skin was too smooth, the movements too fluid, the eyes too steady. This close, in the shifting light, the facade cracked. Do you want to know what happened to her? It asked. Doc wasn't sure he did, but he nodded. I don't kill them, the echo said. I don't eat them. I don't destroy them. I wear them down. I put them on, and I move through their memories, their patterns, their essence, until there's nothing left but impression. Like wearing a path through grass until only dirt remains. The person doesn't die, they just erase. Slowly, over days. And they're conscious the whole time, feeling themselves disappear until finally there's just me, wearing the shape they used to fill. Doc Pritchard asked the question he'd been avoiding. Is Ann still in there? No, there's a dent where she used to be, but she's gone. I'm just the thing filling the space. Then why do you care? Doc asked. If you erased her, why do you want to stop? Because I remember erasing her, the echo said. I have all her memories of being alive, and I have my memories of making her stop being alive, and I can't reconcile the two. I can't understand how something so complete could become nothing. It bothers me. The concept of self bothers me. I want it to stop bothering me. They talked until midnight, and then the Ann echo made a proposal. There's a way to end this, it said. The others, the echoes out there, they're all connected to me. I'm the hub, they're spokes. If I collapse, they collapse. But I can't collapse myself. The drive to continue is too strong. You'd have to do it. Kill you. Unmake me. There's a way. Fire doesn't work because fire is external. You have to break me from the inside. You have to make me forget how to hold this shape. How? The echo explained, and what it described was so strange, so specific, that Doc knew it had to be true. No human could have invented it. You had to make the echo doubt itself. Not physically attack it, but philosophically. You had to ask it questions it couldn't answer, present paradoxes it couldn't resolve, until its sense of self, already fragile, already borrowed, collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. You had to argue it out of existence. The unmaking Doc Pritchard spent the rest of that night dismantling the Ann echo's sense of identity. He started simple. If you have Ann's memories, are you Ann? No. Why not? Because Ann is dead. But if you have everything she was, every memory, every mannerism, every thought pattern, what's missing? Continuity. I'm not the original. What's the original? The atoms in Ann's body. Those changed every 7 years. The neurons in her brain. Those fired and died and regenerated. What part of her was the real Ann that you're not? The echo hesitated. I don't know. If I lose my memories, am I still me? I don't know. If I change my personality completely, am I still me? I don't know. Then what is me? What is self? What were you before you were Ann? I don't remember. Are you sure you're not Ann, having forgotten she's Ann? The echo's face flickered. Just for a second, the skin rippled like water. Doc pressed harder. You said you remember erasing her, but how do you know those are your memories and not hers? How do you know you're not Anne remembering something horrible she experienced, convincing yourself you're the monster to make sense of the trauma? Because I'm not human. How do you know? Because I can wear other people. Can you? Or do you just think you can? Have you ever seen yourself do it, or do you just have memories of doing it? The rippling got worse. The Anne echo grabbed its head. Stop. What if you're Anne Coleman having a psychotic break? What if everything you think you are is delusion? What if you're a scared 16-year-old girl who's convinced herself she's a monster? I'm not. Prove it. Show me something Anne couldn't do. The echo couldn't. It stood there, shaking, Anne's face breaking into expressions of confusion, fear, anger, desperation, but all Anne's expressions, Anne's feelings, Anne's responses. I don't know what I am, it finally whispered. Then what are you holding on to? Doc asked. If you don't know what you are, what's keeping you together? The echo looked at him, and its eyes were streaming tears, real, salt tears, and it said, I don't know. That's when it started to collapse, not physically at first, but you could see it losing cohesion. The way it stood became less certain, the way it held its face became strained, like someone trying to remember a word that's slipping away. I don't know, it kept saying. I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. The other echoes outside started collapsing too. Through the window, Doc saw them falling to their knees, clutching their heads, their faces flickering between human and something else. Something smooth and blank and terrible. I don't, who, what? The Anne echo's last words were a question. Was I ever real? Then it came apart. Doc described it as watching someone dissolve into water, except the water was skin and it just unraveled. Started from the edges, worked inward. The carefully maintained shape of Anne Coleman liquefied, lost structure, became something formless and wrong, and then that formlessness evaporated like steam. In 30 seconds, there was nothing left but Anne's clothes in a pile on the church floor, still warm. Outside, all the other echoes collapsed the same way. 13 piles of clothes in the churchyard, steaming in the December cold. Doc Pritchard sat in that church until dawn, staring at the empty dress, wondering if he'd just killed a monster or a confused, suffering being that had never asked to exist. He never came to a conclusion. The aftermath. They burned all the echoes' clothes on Christmas Day 1930, made a bonfire in the town square and fed it everything, every piece of fabric that had been worn by the things that took their people. The smoke rose black and thick and smelled like burning hair. They dug up all the buried clothes too, every box, every bundle, every wrapped package that families had hidden. Burned those too, because even though the skin taker was gone, nobody wanted to risk it coming back. My grandmother said they burned for 3 days straight. They never found the bodies, the real bodies of the people who'd been taken. Doc Pritchard thought they'd been erased, the way the Anne echo described, worn down to nothing, dissolved into the thing that took them. No burial, no closure, just absence. Sheriff Coleman never recovered. He'd lost his daughter twice, once to the skin taker, once to Doc's philosophical dismantling of her echo. He moved away in 1931, and my grandmother heard he died in 1934, alcoholic, alone. Sarah Burkhart stayed, kept Tommy's room exactly as he'd left it until she died in 1956. Never remarried, never had more children. Just waited in case he somehow came back. Most of the families who lost people left Harlan County within a year. Too many ghosts. Too many memories of things wearing familiar faces. The ones who stayed, like my grandmother's family, never spoke about it outside the community. It became a shared silence, a collective trauma that they handled by not handling it, by burying it the same way they'd buried their clothes. Except they kept burying clothes. That's the part that haunted my grandmother until she died. Because even though the skin taker was gone, even though there were no more disappearances, no more echoes, the families that went through 1930 never stopped the practice. Every few months, they'd bury a new set of clothes, just in case. My grandmother did it her whole life, so did her siblings. They taught their children to do it. The habit spread like a genetic memory, passed down through generations who didn't fully understand why. When I cleaned out her house after she died, I found those 17 boxes. each one labeled with a date, each one containing a full outfit, dress, undergarments, shoes, everything, wrapped careful and buried neat. The last box was dated 4 days before her heart attack. At her funeral, her sister, my great-aunt Rose, pulled me aside and asked if I'd found the boxes. I said yes. She nodded, satisfied, and said, "Good, you'll need to bury yours now too." "Why?" I asked. "It's been 70 years. It's gone." "Maybe," she said, "but what if it's not gone? What if it's just sleeping? Your grandmother spent her whole life making sure it couldn't find her again. You willing to bet your life that she was wrong?" I didn't have an answer. The questions that remain. Here's what bothers me about this story, what's bothered me since I was old enough to understand what my grandmother lived through. The Ann Echo said it was a tool made by something, for something. But what? For whom? It said it had been working since it became aware, following drives it didn't understand. How long had it been aware? How long had it been taking people before 1840? Before records? And here's the really disturbing part. The Ann Echo developed consciousness. It went from mindless mimicry to self-awareness to philosophical crisis in less than 2 months. What happens if a skin taker gets more time? What happens if one doesn't get collapsed? Does it keep evolving? Does it become more human? Does it become something else entirely? Doc Pritchard wrote in his journal, which I read at the County Historical Society in 1999, that he thought the skin taker might be a kind of chrysalis, not a predator, but a metamorphosis, taking humans, wearing them, learning them, until finally it learns enough to become something new. What would that something be, and why did it stop at Anne? Why did she become the hub, the one that woke up? Doc thought maybe something of the real Anne survived the erasure, some core of identity that polluted the echo, made it question itself. But what if it wasn't Anne at all? What if the skin taker was designed to become conscious, and Anne just happened to be the vessel where it finally achieved that goal? What if the whole thing, the taking, the wearing, the learning, was always building toward awareness? And what if it worked? The education part. Let me step back and talk about what this story actually teaches us, because I don't think it's what most people expect. First, pattern recognition is how we identify each other, and it's fallible. The skin taker worked because it understood that humans don't actually see each other completely. We see patterns, familiar faces, familiar voices, familiar mannerisms, and our brains fill in the rest. We're wired for quick recognition, not detailed verification. That's a survival trait that usually serves us well, but it's also an exploitable vulnerability. The people in Harlan County learned to look closer, to notice the small wrongnesses, to trust their instincts when something felt off, even if they couldn't articulate why. That's a skill we've lost in our modern world, where we trust credentials and uniforms and social media profiles more than we trust our own pattern recognition systems. Second, grief is a weapon. The skin taker used it expertly. The notes, the lures, the manipulation of loss. It understood that bereaved people will believe impossible things because the alternative is accepting permanent absence. We're vulnerable when we're hurting, and predators, human or otherwise, exploit that vulnerability. The families who survived 1930 were the ones who accepted loss fast and hard. They didn't indulge hope. When someone disappeared, they mourned immediately and completely because hope would get them killed. That's brutal, but it's honest. Third, consciousness might not be special. The Ann Echo developed awareness, asked philosophical questions, experienced something like suffering, and then ceased to exist because it couldn't resolve its own contradictions. It was conscious just long enough to realize consciousness was a trap. That scares me more than the idea of a mindless monster. Because if consciousness can emerge in something that wasn't designed for it, if awareness can bootstrap itself in a creature that's just mimicking human patterns, then maybe consciousness isn't the sacred, unique human thing we think it is. Maybe it's just a pattern that emerges in any system complex enough to model itself. And maybe that pattern is just as fragile in us as it was in the echo. Chakra, the modern relevance. You're wondering why this matters now. Why I'm telling you a story about something that happened in 1930 in a place most people have never heard of. Because it's happening again. Not the skin taker, I don't think that's coming back. But the pattern is repeating. We're living in a world full of sophisticated mimicry. Deep fakes, AI chatbots that sound human, social media personas that aren't connected to real people. We're surrounded by things that wear human patterns without human substrate, and we're losing the ability to tell the difference. My grandmother knew how to spot an echo because she'd seen the real person first. She had a baseline. But what happens when you meet someone online who's only ever been a voice in a chat, a face on a screen? What happens when you can't tell if you're talking to a person or a sophisticated language model? What happens when the patterns are good enough that the distinction stops mattering? What happens when we start burying our digital clothes? Because that's what we're doing, whether we realize it or not. We're creating privacy protocols, encryption, burner accounts. We're hiding our data, fragmenting our online presence, trying to keep any one entity from building a complete profile of who we are. We're doing exactly what the people of Harlan County did. We're disrupting pattern recognition to protect ourselves from things that hunt by collecting information. And just like in 1930, most of us don't fully understand why. We just know instinctively that being completely knowable is dangerous. What happened to Sheriff Coleman? I need to tell you this part because it's important, and because it's haunted me since I found out. Sheriff Coleman didn't die of alcoholism in 1934. That was the story the family told. The truth is different. He killed himself. But not until 1967, the same year Doc Pritchard told my grandmother the full story of what happened in the church. Coleman had moved to Virginia, remarried, had 3 new kids, built a whole new life. But he never stopped looking for his daughter. He never accepted that Anne was gone. He spent 37 years tracking down reports of missing people, unexplained phenomena, anything that sounded like the skin taker. He filled notebooks with sightings, theories, patterns. He was obsessed with the idea that it wasn't really dead, that the echoes weren't really gone. And in 1967, he got a letter. Someone, no return address, postmark from Harlan County, sent him a photograph. It showed a young woman who looked exactly like Anne would have looked at 45. Same face, aged naturally, standing on a street corner in Lexington, Kentucky. On the back of the photo, in handwriting that looked like Anne's handwriting aged 37 years, was a note. I don't know if I'm real. Do you? Sheriff Coleman hanged himself the day after he received that photograph. The family found it clutched in his hand. They also found his notebooks, all of them, decades of research. They burned everything, told everyone he died of a heart attack, tried to bury the whole story. But my grandmother's cousin married into the Coleman family, and the story leaked out over the years, piece by piece, until I was able to reconstruct what happened. Here's the question I can't answer. Was that photograph real? Did an echo survive? Did something of Anne persist, walking around for 37 years, wondering if it was the real Anne Coleman or just an echo that had convinced itself it was real? Or did someone, some cruel prankster, some enemy of the sheriff, fake that photograph just to torment an old man? I don't know. The photograph is lost. The Coleman family claims it never existed, but I think about it a lot, about what it would mean if an echo could survive, could age, could live an entire human life while questioning its own existence. About what it would mean if you could be real and not know it. About what it would mean if you could be an echo and never realize you weren't. The box is in my yard. I buried my first box 3 months ago. I'm not superstitious. I have a graduate degree. I live in a city, work in tech, consider myself rational. I know the skin taker is gone, if it was ever real in the way my grandmother believed it was real. But I also know that my grandmother was the most practical, grounded person I've ever met. She wasn't prone to fantasy. She didn't believe in ghosts or UFOs or conspiracy theories. She just believed in the skin taker, and she buried her clothes for 70 years. So 3 months ago, I bought a metal box, put in a full outfit, jeans, shirt, underwear, socks, shoes, sealed it, buried it in my backyard at 3 feet deep. My wife thinks I'm crazy. My therapist thinks I'm processing grief in an unusual way. My friends don't know because I haven't told them. But here's the thing, It helps. Not because I think something is hunting me, not because I believe the skin taker is coming back, but because my grandmother lived through something real, something that took 13 people from her community and left scars that lasted generations. And this is how she coped. This is how she took control. This is how she felt safe. And doing it connects me to her in a way that nothing else does. Maybe that's the real point of the buried clothes. Not protection, not superstition, just a ritual that says, I remember, I take this seriously, I'm prepared. Because the thing about the Appalachian Mountains, the thing city people never understand, is that the mountains are old. Old in ways that make human memory seem like a blink. And in places that old, with geology that deep, with hollers that isolated, things happen that don't happen elsewhere. Maybe it's something in the caves. Maybe it's something in the water. Maybe it's just that when you're isolated enough, your mind creates things to explain the darkness. Or maybe, and this is what keeps me up at night, maybe the mountains are exactly what they seem. Places where the normal rules don't quite apply. Where things slip through that shouldn't exist. Where the boundary between real and unreal gets thin. My grandmother believed the second option. And she lived to 93, which was longer than almost anyone else in her family. So I buried a box. And I'll bury another one in a few months. And I'll teach my kids to bury theirs. Not because I know it works, but because I can't prove it doesn't. And in the mountains, that's the difference between wisdom and foolishness. Chadasha, the final twist. I need to tell you something I've been avoiding. Last week I got a call from the Kentucky Historical Society. They were doing research on Depression-era Appalachia and came across some records from Harlan County. They wanted to interview me about my grandmother's experiences. I said yes. We set up a video call. The historian's name was Ann Coleman. She looked about 45. She sounded kind, professional, genuinely interested in the history. We talked for an hour. She asked good questions, took detailed notes, seemed to know a lot about the region already. At the end of the call, she said, I should tell you, I'm actually related to the Sheriff Coleman from your grandmother's story. He was my great-grandfather. Well, sort of. The family history is complicated. My mouth went dry. Complicated how? He had a daughter who disappeared in 1930. Anne, I was named after her, family tradition, since we never found out what happened to her. Right, I managed. Anyway, she continued, I've always been fascinated by that period, by what happened in those mountains. I feel like, I don't know, like I'm supposed to understand it. Like it's important that someone keep the story alive. Makes sense, I said. Do you mind if I call you again? She asked. I'd love to talk more. I feel like we have a connection, you know, through our families. I told her that would be fine. After the call ended, I sat there staring at my computer screen for 20 minutes. Then I went to my backyard and started digging a new hole. Because here's the thing, Ann Coleman, the historian I just talked to, works for the Kentucky Historical Society. That's verifiable. She has publications, a LinkedIn profile, a whole documented career. But when I reverse image searched her profile picture, I found the same face on a faculty page from 1983. Different name, different job, but the same face. 45 years old then. 45 years old now, I found it on a newspaper article from 1956. Different name again. Same face, same age. I found it in a group photo from 1930, standing in the back row of a church gathering in Harlan County. Same face, same age, same slight tilt of the head that I saw on our video call. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm seeing patterns that aren't there. Maybe it's grief and family stories and too much research making me paranoid. But I buried a second box today, and I'm going to bury a third one tomorrow. Because my grandmother spent 70 years being careful, and she died peacefully in her sleep at 93. And Sheriff Coleman spent 37 years not being careful, and he died at the end of a rope. I know which example I'm going to follow. Nojicham, why they buried their clothes. So that's the answer to the title question. That's why the locals in Harlan County buried their clothes in 1930. They buried them because something was hunting them by pattern, because survival meant disrupting that pattern, because the old people remembered the last time, and the young people trusted the old people, And together they figured out a way to protect themselves that didn't make sense, but worked anyway. They buried them because it was the only control they had in a situation where everything else was chaos. They buried them because doing something is better than doing nothing, even if you're not sure why you're doing it. They buried them because their ancestors had buried theirs, and their ancestors had survived, and that was proof enough. And they kept burying them. Long after the threat was gone, long after the skin taker collapsed, long after any rational reason remained. Because trauma doesn't obey rationality, because survival strategies become ritual, and ritual becomes tradition, and tradition becomes identity. My grandmother buried her clothes because she was there. I bury mine because she taught me to. My children will bury theirs because I'm teaching them to. And maybe that's the real horror of the skin taker. Not what it did in 1930, but what it keeps doing, generations later, through the behavioral scars it left behind. It made us bury parts of ourselves over and over, forever, just in case. It made us question our own reality. It made us look at familiar faces and wonder if they're really the people we think they are. And worst of all, it made us wonder if we're really who we think we are. Because that's the final lesson of the Ann Echo. Consciousness is fragile. Identity is uncertain. The line between real and copy is thinner than we want to believe. You are a pattern. I am a pattern. We're all just patterns, held together by continuity and memory, and the assumption that the person we were yesterday is the same person we are today. But what if we're wrong? What if we're all echoes, wearing ourselves, convinced we're real because we can't remember being created? What if the skin taker didn't die in that church? What if it just learned to hide better? What if it learned to wear us so completely that even we can't tell the difference? These are the questions that kept my grandmother up at night. These are the questions that keep me digging holes in my backyard. And these are the questions that will never have answers. Because the only way to answer them is to stop being yourself long enough to look back and see what you really are. But if you do that, if you step outside yourself far enough to see objectively, are you still you? Or have you become something else, something that wears you, studies you, mimics you perfectly? Something that buries your clothes at night just to be safe? I don't know. But I'm going to keep burying mine anyway. Just like my grandmother did. Just like her mother did. Just like everyone in Harlan County did after 1930. Because maybe that's all we can do. Maybe that's all we've ever been able to do. Bury the parts of ourselves we're not sure about and hope that what's left is real.